So, all right.
I'm an open book.
All right. Well, I'm not going to ask you private information or anything like that. So this is just a little bit of an intro slide. This is me and my sweetheart. We're grief recovery specialists, certified through an organization called the Grief Recovery Institute. The institute has been around for some 40 years, something like that, and helped over 1 million people. And so that's what we do. We're a grief recovery specialist, and we talk about our favorite topic, grief. So an example that I like to use is this grief as a backpack. Let me pull these guys down here just to kind of be fun here. So you think about grief. The purpose of this slide is really to emphasize that grief is universal, that it's something that we all experience. And as much as we want to shield ourselves or our children from grief, it's not really possible to do that. You look at this kid, he's looking pretty carefree, he's got his cool clothes, he's going to go hang out with his friends. And what could a kid have to worry about? Well, he might have things to worry about. He's got school, he's got interactions with, the school bully or something like that, or maybe his team isn't doing well, or his family is having some challenges. And so what we like to think of it as a backpack, and we're all issued these backpacks when we're babies, and we put each of these little grief-inducing these pieces of grief, we put them in our backpacks like little rocks. They come in different shapes and sizes. As we get a little bit older, we're kind of this person right here. We have a good backpack. We have it like close to our center of mass. But the rocks, they keep filling up. We keep throwing them in there, but we can move forward. Like, we got it. And then pretty soon we're this person right here. We're kind of all surrounded. Our backpack's getting a little bit messy, and we're climbing up the trail, and it's getting a little bit harder, but hey, I can still make it. I think this guy always looks like Peter Parker to me, or not Peter, Andrew Garfield, but he's really making a lot of progress down the path of life gets a lot more difficult. And ultimately, we end up like this cool Marine here, who thinks that he's got it all bottled up. He just got back from wherever he got back from, Iraqistan. And he's got his sea bag on his back, on his front, and he's all balanced out. He's got the cool shades, the Marine, nothing can get through this hard exterior, right? But if he's trying to get close to his family, it's going to be a little bit hard to really connect with his family. So this is just kind of a symbol. And so instead of dealing with those grief events and pulling out those rocks and letting them go, we carry them with us. So the idea here is that grief is universal, and that it is actually universally, or it's accumulatively harmful if we don't cope with it. So with the Grief Recovery Institute, we have some definitions, some working definitions that we like to use. So grief is a normal and natural reaction or response to a change or loss of any kind. So we like to, oftentimes grief is from, we tend to think that grief is from death and end of a romantic relationship. And certainly those are grief-inducing events, and they're very profound ones. But grief really comes from any kind of change or loss. For instance, moving. Moving is a big one. We've moved a lot. I think you've moved a lot in your life. And, even if it's moving across the street or moving across the country or moving out of a country, there's a lot of emotions around that. We can feel excited about new opportunities, but also there's a lot of unknowns. And so those feelings that we get, we call that grief. The second one is the conflicting feelings that come from a change or end in a familiar pattern of behavior. So an example would be My daughter-in-law just had a baby, so my wife and I are grandparents. So we're obviously very excited and happy about that. But I think about my son, my daughter-in-law, and how much their life has changed. And of course, they are over the moon about this little child, but also their lives have changed and they're never going to go back. It's hard to get a lot of sleep, and they have to weigh all of these competing challenges in their lives and make sure they take care of this little one. And so with those feelings are not that they're a bad parent or anything like that. No, these are just feelings of grief. Does that make sense? Does that kind of connect a little bit?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that's really what grief is. These two things: any change or loss is a normal reaction to that, and there's those conflicting feelings. I think about people going on missions or coming back from missions or graduating from high school or something like that, or changing jobs. There's a lot of emotions around that, and grief comes from any kind of a change. Um, like we kind of referred to, pet loss is a big one, and that's something that happens to a lot of people. Um, a lot of people have pets, and we become very close to those. I think for children, especially, pet loss can be a big one because, especially pets that we really interact with emotionally, like dogs and cats, maybe horses, some things like that. When that pet when that pet dies, they can be really distraught for a long time, even more so than when a family member dies that they've only met once or twice or never, that lives across the country. They don't feel as much loss around that one because they just don't feel connected with them. But this pet loss can be profound.
Oh yeah, I love my dog. If I were to lose my dog, I'd be super sad.
Yeah, and you don't really want to face the fact that it's going to happen, right?
Oh, it's gonna happen for sure. Everybody dies.
Yeah, and so it's a tough one, right? And we also have these things that we like to call intangible losses, losses that are not necessarily attributable to a person or a thing. Um, Really, it's the loss of any hopes, dreams, and expectations, or wishing something had been different, better, or more in the past. So it could be a loss of safety, a loss of trust, a loss of control, that loss of faith. A lot of times people are raised in certain faith traditions and something happens in their life and their faith can be really shaken, and that can be really destabilizing for a person because they've kind of built their life around that. So those can be really, really painful. What we found is that intangible losses often are kind of tied back to a person, like something or someone. Something happened with a person, and they are connected with that. But these are big ones. There's a lot of myths and misinformation about grief, and once you kind of learn about them, you start seeing them all over the place. Um, you start seeing them in like popular media, TV shows, and stuff like that. Um, so some examples would be, oh, don't feel bad. You got to be strong for your mom. You can't feel bad here. You gotta move on. You have too much going for you to pause. So these are 6 of them that we think about. Don't feel bad. Replace the loss. Grieve alone. Give it time. Be strong for others. Keep busy. So we talked about. I love this. This pet. So an example would be kid's dog dies and grandpa says, yeah, Saturday we'll get you a new dog. And even if the dog looks just the same, especially a dog where a child has a close emotional relationship with that dog, even if it looks the same, it's not the same, right? You just cannot replace this. I mean, you could, not saying that we shouldn't get a new pet necessarily, but we're carrying these expectations about this relationship over here. The dog knows me, I know the dog. We cannot just go from A to B. That's not something we can do. It also happens potentially with romantic relationships. Another one is this idea of being at a funeral. Well, time heals all wounds. And actually, religious appeals are kind of along these same lines. Maybe in our tradition, well, they'll be resurrected, they'll be without pain, or stuff like that. These are all intellectual appeals to an emotional pain. Grief is emotional, it's not intellectual, and so if we use intellectual appeals to try to cope with it, it doesn't really work. I think in my experience, and this is, I kind of feel like this is a little bit of a crass way of putting it, and you'll have to tell me if you think this is, if you if this seems accurate. We kind of create this little bit of a table in our mind. Okay, what kind of a loss is it? And what was the circumstances? And then this is how much time they get to grieve before they're not allowed to grieve anymore. Okay, it was a goldfish. Okay, we'll give them a day. We'll be generous. It was a dog. Okay, we'll give them. How old was the dog? How old? All these. We create these images. I think about in my. I was in the Navy, and I think about all these sailors that I met, and they would say, "Oh, my grandma died." And I asked this, and I'm embarrassed about asking this question. I would ask them how old they were, and I would ask them what they died of, and the what was implied there was if they were really old, then okay, we're not sad, or if they, something like that. Instead of just being there with them and mourning with them and consoling them and things like that. But we kind of create this. Well, it's been how many years since since this event, and you're still broken? You still feel broken inside? What's wrong with you? Well, the thing is, time doesn't heal wounds. One example that the Grief Recovery Institute uses is you get a flat tire, and you call up. You're going to go meet a friend or a family member, and say, "Hey, I got a flat tire. I'll be there in an hour. I just got to wait for the tire to fix itself." Well, that doesn't make any sense. It's going to just give it some time. It's going to take care of it. Now, you actually have to take action steps in order to be able to get that get the car on the road again. Well, it's similar with these kinds of with losses. It's not just time. There's action steps that we can take to move through it and come out the other side. So there's all these other. Does that make sense? What do you think?
So, some of those items on your list, I would agree would be, just ways of kind of avoiding, the sorrow or the grief. But some of them might be useful tools, if you use them correctly. Like I wouldn't depend on any of these things, for instance, as a way to cope. But from my experience, when I'm dealing with grief, it is useful at times to find something to keep busy, because you can get into a mode where your brain is constantly focusing on the grief, like it's nonstop. And if you're in that mode, well, you got to get out of that mode. And
Yeah.
one way to get out of that mode is to start doing a task, do something,
Mm-hmm.
get yourself distracted for a little bit and give yourself a breather, from the waves of constant sorrow. And so, but I wouldn't, like, some people take that and say, well, I'm just going to keep busy all the time, so I never have to deal with these feelings. So what I would say is, like, yes, like relying on some of these things are just, bull crap, be strong for others and all that kind of. I mean, sometimes you do have to do that. I mean, as a father, I've had to be strong for my children so they don't freak out. Like I have to, be there. But anyways, I wouldn't rely on them as a way to deal with the grief, but they can be tools.
Yeah, no, I agree. So let me pull up this slide right here. So this is about coping mechanisms. STIRB is kind of a word that we use. So if you were to think about some event in your life, I'm not really necessarily asking you to do it, but something that like a grief-inducing experience or relationship. you would probably maybe some feelings would start rising in your chest, like I remember when this person or this thing, and if I were to think about people that I worked for, or people that I didn't or worked with, I could start getting some feelings in my heart. And just think about that as energy, like in a steam kettle. It's boiling, and there's like it starts to boil a little bit more. And so we want to relieve that energy, and that energy is not something we really like. So we want to relieve it, just kind of like what you were talking about, because we got to move on. We have things to do. We have people to take care of and responsibilities. And so short term, we use these things. And when you start looking at this list, some of these things are not necessarily like some of them are more harmful than others. Some of them are not necessarily inherently bad. But the challenge is when we are using them to mask feelings of grief instead of dealing with the underlying grief itself. So food is a big one, alcohol, drugs, tobacco, vaping, those are big in our society. Shopping, retail therapy, those 3 a.m. Amazon shopping trips, you buy it and you're excited, and it kind of sets aside some of that emotional pain maybe, and then we get to wait for a day or two or however long it takes for it to get there, and then it arrives and we're excited and we have this thing, and then it's like it just keeps, the cycle continues. Adrenaline, sex, pornography, exercise, I think, is an interesting one. My wife and I were giving this a version of this presentation to some chaplain candidates earlier this year, and so we got to this part in the presentation, and this gal, and I don't know how old she was. I'm gonna say she was in her mid-30s or something like that. She said that when she was maybe 20, something like that, she had gotten married. She'd fallen in love. She had all these goals, dreams, hopes, dreams, and expectations about how her marriage was gonna go. Well, it ended up being a nightmare, and she got divorced after a year or two. And she found that she liked to run, and so she found herself running more and more as a way of coping with this grief. And I don't know that she necessarily intentionally did it, but she found herself doing that more and more. And she had a prompting, like I think she would call it a spiritual prompting, that told her, hey, this is not how I want you to cope with this underlying grief. Not that not that exercise is bad, but deal with the underlying grief and then choose, make a concerted effort, use your agency to decide how much you want to exercise. I thought that was really thoughtful when she shared that. Social media, sleep, maybe too much, too little, keeping busy. Anger can be an energy relieving behavior. Um, Isolation, gambling, workaholism. I even think that more fervent religiosity can be an energy relieving behavior to a degree. Just another way of keeping really busy. So really, the idea here is to kind of, and when we teach people the grief recovery method, we encourage them to kind of look at some of these, if any of these kind of speak to them. Hey, do I have this relationship with this thing that I want to kind of reanalyze, I guess, and maybe you can tie it back to something that happened in their life and just create a healthier relationship with that. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like I would say some of these things on this are not beneficial. I mean, they are distractions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but some of them, like exercise, has been a way for me to deal with grief, in a good, positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in fact, the way that I would cope with grief in the past would be to eat. And I was obese. I was like over 300 pounds at one point, and and that kind of coping was destructive all
Yeah.
the way around.
Yep.
But switching to, instead of like eating, like going on a walk, Like walking has been kind of like my staple. It's been a form of therapy for me. And when I'm walking, it allows me to, to calm my mind, to think, to kind of process, things that are going on. Exercising allows me to kind of get into a Zen mode so that I can, start actually dealing with the grief as opposed to, it helps me to get it into focus.
Hmm.
So, you know, uh, but I would say like, isolation, for instance, I mean, that could be good too, honestly.
Hmm.
When you're isolated, like I've been like very isolated, and when you're in that mode for a while, your ego eventually gets shattered, and then you start realizing how important other people are in your life.
Hmm.
And then whenever you do finally see people that you love, I mean, you kind of get this sense of like, I appreciate that. Like, I mean, like I want these people in my life. So I would look at all of these things as make sure that we don't use them to allow us ourselves to spiral, because I've been probably guilty of all these things at one point.
Hmm.
And if I like beat myself up for succumbing to some of these weaknesses, then that's not good either, because then I end up spiraling out of control and I just get deeper into this dark pit. So
Yeah, for sure.
little bit of mercy, when we
Yeah,
stumble and we do stupid crap.
absolutely. Yeah. What I think is interesting about this is there's no judgment on them. It's just kind of it's a self-reflection. It's, you're not divulging them to anybody unless you want to, but these are just, it's just a checking on your relationship with things. Oh, you know what? There's a reason I do that. And, if I cope with the underlying grief, maybe I can set that behavior aside and introduce something that I really want to be. I want to be this person. I don't necessarily want to be this person. It's taking charge of who we are. So there's this, we're not really going to spend time on this one, but I really like this. So the Grief Recovery Institute has a nice YouTube channel, and they created quite a few recent videos of these interviews with the well, he's the president, um, but he has this one about emotional communications that I'd really recommend watching it. I think that it's very useful for parents, in how to communicate with their children. Sometimes our children, they want us to give them advice, and sometimes they really don't, but they want to talk to us, and they just want to vent. They just want to express something, and if we go in, we're going to solve all the problems. And they're just like, I don't want you to solve any problems, Dad. I just want you to. I just need to talk to somebody. And I think this is a really wonderful video, so I recommend it. Hopefully the hopefully the QR code still works. So I'll just kind of leave that there. So the grief recovery method, that's what we offer, is the grief recovery method. It's an action program. So there's different kinds of grief programs. This one is not just a talk about, this is what happens, more of a grief share, but this is an action program that moves a person beyond loss. It's actually evidence based. There's been some studies on the grief recovery method, and it's been shown by evidence to provide help with grief. Um, it's really for anyone that has had any kind of significant loss and they want to feel better. I've used the tools of the grief recovery method several times for several different losses, and it's amazing the enhancement that it has brought to my life. It is a set of tools that once we teach you once, then you're able to employ for any other subsequent kind of loss. Any of those kinds that we talked about earlier with family members, or even some of those more um, intangible losses. So how is it different? We don't separate people. Okay, this is the group for this kind of loss. This is the group for this kind of loss. Everybody kind of comes together, and it has a start and a stop. It's about 7 or 8 sessions, depending on if it's done one-on-one or in a group setting. And so it's not like the chiropractor where you got to go back forever. You do it 7 or 8 times, and then we teach you a foundation. You kind of and then we build from that. All of the specialists, including myself and my wife, we've done this work ourselves multiple times, and we only focus on grief. Um, so here, just give me a second here. So we talked about each of those ones. Let me share this one. All right. So what I really like, I think this funnel is pretty helpful. Maybe funnel is a weird word, but anyway, that's the word. So we talked about, so I mentioned this foundation idea. Everything we've talked about today, we go into greater detail. And those are kind of some old tools. We talk more about these myths and the misinformation. But then we move into several new tools over the following weeks. So we build this foundation, we move into this kind of, I like to think of this one as kind of a discovery. We're kind of looking into these things that have happened in our lives and kind of becoming okay with acknowledging the losses in our lives. And then we move from discovery into recovery. My wife is actually doing the grief recovery method with a couple of clients, and they are to this like they're towards the end, and it's really pretty exciting when you get down here. You can kind of notice that it's getting narrower in focus. This one we're talking about a lot of things, and then we're really focusing down. That's kind of the idea of the grief recovery method. And then the last thing is we have some upcoming classes. We have the holidays coming up. Actually, my wife is offering all of these classes, and they're kind of done different times of the day so these are different sessions, and they'll be held over like once a week over a couple of months. The grief recovery method, that's kind of our flagship program, and that's 7 or 8 sessions. And then we also have one called Helping Children with Loss. That is for adults. It's not for children. And this one is 4 sessions. It's to teach parents, coaches, church leaders, anybody that works with children, kind of give them some tools to be able to communicate better with their children, help them cope with the grief in their life, because children do experience profound grief as well. There was a long time when people kind of didn't believe that, and then Columbine happened in Colorado all those years ago, and people started realizing that, oh yeah, even our children have a lot of grief. But so this is what we do. Any thoughts? Any questions?
No, no, no questions. Makes sense. Looks like an interesting program.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that was kind of an abrupt ending. No, I appreciate it. Something we've really come to love. If you have any questions or anything,
How long
um,
have you been doing this?
couple of years. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. My nephew died a couple of years ago, and I through my brother actually I found out about the Grief Recovery Institute, um, and found when I was retiring from the Navy, I decided that I wanted to pursue doing this as more full time, I guess. So yeah.
Okay. So like you were close to your nephew. That was a tough loss for you.
Well, I wasn't actually terribly close with him. We lived far away from him all those years, but seeing the anguish that my brother and my mom always said you never want to bury a child, and I think that you never want to bury a grandchild. So I think about her, how she's gonna cope with that, and he found out about it. My brother found out about the grief recovery. Actually, his son, before he died, like right before he died, he said, "Hey, Dad, I need you to promise that you and the girls will get grief counseling." I don't think he didn't know what that meant, but he was worried about his family, and so my brother found out about it, and then I found out that they had a certification program, and I got interested in it. So yeah, that's kind of the story.
Okay. How long were you in the Navy?
Almost 24 years.
Okay, awesome. And what did you do in the Navy?
I was a submarine officer.
Yeah, my little brother was in the Navy. He was on destroyer class.